Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he checked the cargo manifest for the third time that morning. Colony Station Beta 7 was not the busiest trading post in the galaxy, but it kept him busy enough. The small station floated at the edge of human space, serving as a neutral meeting point for different alien races who wanted to trade without the politics of the core worlds. The morning alarm buzzed, telling Jake that a ship was asking to dock. He looked at his screen and saw a small military transport with human markings. That was unusual. Military ships rarely came this far out unless something was wrong. Jake walked to the docking bay and waited. The transport ship landed with a soft thud, and the airlock opened with a hiss. A woman in a military uniform stepped out first. She had short brown hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. Behind her came a large dog with black and brown fur. The dog's tongue hung out as it panted from the journey. But the third passenger made Jake step back in surprise. A massive creature walked out of the ship, standing nearly 8 feet tall. Its skin was dark green with scales that caught the light. The creature had a long tail and clawed hands, but it moved slowly and kept its head down. Jake recognized the species immediately. It was a draconian, one of the most feared warrior races in the galaxy. The woman noticed Jake's reaction and raised her hand in a peaceful gesture. "My name is Lieutenant Amy Carter," she said. "This is Max." She pointed to the dog, who wagged his tail. "And this is Kethvar." The big alien nodded his head slightly when his name was said. Jake found his voice. "What brings you to Beta 7, Lieutenant?" Amy looked tired as she spoke. "We need a place to stay for a while. Kethvar has requested asylum with the human government. We've been traveling for 3 months and our ship needs repairs." Jake stared at the draconian. He had heard stories about their kind. They were known as brutal warriors who showed no mercy in battle. They conquered worlds and enslaved weaker species. But this one seemed different. Kethvar stood quietly, making no threatening moves. "He's really asking for asylum?" Jake asked. "Yes," Amy replied. "It's a long story." Jake gestured for them to follow him into the station. As they walked through the corridors, other humans stopped what they were doing to stare. Word spread quickly in a small station, and soon everyone knew about the unusual visitors. They reached Jake's office, and he offered them seats. Max lay down at Amy's feet, while Kethvar sat carefully in a reinforced chair. The alien's deep voice rumbled when he spoke. "I thank you for allowing us to enter your station," Kethvar said in accented English. "I know my presence here is unusual." Jake leaned back in his chair. "That's one way to put it. What made you decide to ask for asylum?" Amy and Kethvar exchanged a look. Amy spoke first. "My unit was fighting draconian forces on Kepler 452b about 4 months ago. It was a small skirmish, nothing major. But during the battle, some of Kethvar's soldiers were badly wounded." She paused and looked at the big alien. What happened next surprised everyone, including me. My soldiers started giving medical aid to the wounded draconians instead of leaving them to die. Kethvar's voice was quiet when he continued the story. "In my culture, showing mercy to enemies is seen as weakness. We do not help those we defeat, but I watched human soldiers risk their own lives to save my warriors. They carried wounded draconians to safety while under enemy fire." Jake listened, with growing interest. This was not what he had expected to hear. "I could not understand why they would do this," Kethvar continued. "So I approached under a white flag and asked to speak with their commander." He looked at Amy. "That was her." Amy smiled slightly. He walked right up to our lines with his hands raised. My soldiers were ready to shoot, but something about him seemed different. He asked me why we helped his wounded soldiers. "And what did you tell him?" Jake asked. "I told him that it was the right thing to do, that we don't leave anyone to suffer if we can help it, even enemies." Amy's voice was firm. He stood there for about 10 minutes, just thinking. Then he laid down his weapons and asked to surrender. Kethvar nodded. But not just surrender. I requested to learn about human ways. I wanted to understand this concept of mercy and honor that made enemies into healers. Jake was amazed by the story. "And your superiors agreed to this?" "It took some convincing," Amy admitted. But Kethvar provided valuable intelligence about draconian military operations. In exchange, they agreed to let him apply for asylum and allowed me to escort him. "What about Max?" Jake asked, looking at the dog who was now sleeping peacefully. Amy's face softened. "Max was already with my unit. He's trained to detect explosives and help with search and rescue. But something funny happened during our journey." She looked at Kethvar, who seemed almost embarrassed. "Tell him," she encouraged. The big alien's voice was even quieter now. "The animal, Max. He was not afraid of me. Other humans would step back when I approached, but Max would come forward. At first I thought he was stupid or broken." Amy laughed softly. "Max started following Kethvar around everywhere. And slowly, Kethvar started taking care of him, feeding him, making sure he had water, even playing with him." Jake watched as Kethvar reached down and gently petted Max's head. The dog's tail wagged in his sleep. "In draconian culture, we see smaller creatures as food or obstacles," Kethvar explained. "But Max taught me something different. He showed me loyalty without fear, trust without conditions. Through caring for him, I began to understand what humans call compassion." Jake shook his head in wonder. "So you've been traveling together for 3 months?" "Yes," Amy said. "Kethvar has been learning human customs and language. He's also been helping us understand draconian technology and culture. It's been educational for all of us." Jake looked at the unlikely trio. A human soldier, a dog, and a former alien warlord who had learned to show kindness. It was certainly not something he saw every day. "Well," Jake said finally, "you're welcome to stay while your ship gets repaired, but I should warn you, Station Administrator Collins can be difficult about new arrivals. He has strict rules about who can stay on the station." Amy's expression grew worried. "What kind of rules?" "Let's just say he's not very flexible when it comes to regulations," Jake replied, "especially about animals." Kethvar tilted his large head. "Animals?" Jake looked at Max, sleeping peacefully on the floor, then at the massive alien who had just demonstrated such gentle behavior. "Yeah," he said with a slight smile. "This should be interesting." Station Administrator Collins was not having a good day. His coffee maker had broken that morning, 2 cargo shipments were delayed, and now Jake Morrison was asking for permission to house unusual guests. Collins sat behind his desk, reading the request form with a deep frown. "Absolutely not," Collins said, not looking up from his tablet. Section 15.3 of station regulations clearly states that no animals are permitted in the residential areas. They could contaminate our closed ecosystem. Jake stood in front of the desk, trying to stay calm. "Sir, with respect, these are special circumstances. Lieutenant Carter is military personnel and her companions have been cleared by Earth Command." Collins finally looked up, his thin face showing irritation. "I don't care if they were cleared by the President himself. Rules are rules, Morrison. No animals on my station." Amy stepped forward from where she had been waiting by the door. Max sat beside her, and Kethvar stood quietly behind them both. Administrator Collins, may I ask which animal you're referring to? My dog or the ex-warlord? Collins opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. His face turned red as he looked back and forth between Max and Kethvar. Several other station workers, who had gathered to watch the meeting, started to whisper among themselves. That is... Obviously, I meant, Collins stammered, clearly flustered by the question. Amy waited patiently while Collins tried to find his words. Behind her, she could hear someone trying not to laugh. The question had caught the administrator completely off guard. The dog. Of course, Collins finally managed to say. The Draconian is obviously a sentient being. So Kethvar can stay? Amy asked. Well, yes. But the animal still cannot. Amy looked thoughtful. I see. So you're saying that Kethvar, who used to lead armies that destroyed entire colonies, is welcome here. But Max, who has saved dozens of human lives by finding bombs and rescuing people, is too dangerous for your station? The whispers from the watching crowd grew louder. Collins realized that his position was starting to sound unreasonable. Kethvar stepped forward slowly, making sure not to seem threatening. Administrator Collins, may I speak? Collins nodded nervously. He had never been this close to a Draconian before, and Kethvar's size was impressive. In my former life, I commanded fleets that turned planets to ash, Kethvar said in his deep, careful voice. I killed thousands of beings without thought or regret. By any measure, I am far more dangerous than the small creature you fear. He looked down at Max, who had wandered over to sniff Collins's shoes. But this animal has taught me things about loyalty and trust that my warrior training never could. He sees not my scales or my claws, but simply another being to care for. Collins watched nervously as Max finished investigating his shoes and sat down, tail wagging. Perhaps, Kethvar continued, the true danger to your ecosystem is not the presence of animals, but the absence of compassion. The crowd of station workers murmured their agreement. Jake could see that public opinion was definitely not on Collins. Sighed. Collins cleared his throat loudly. The regulations are very clear about this matter. I cannot make exceptions, no matter how touching the circumstances might be. What if we found a compromise? Jake suggested quickly. Max could stay in the cargo bay areas, away from the residential sections, and Kethvar could take responsibility for him. Amy looked surprised. You would do that? She asked Kethvar. The big alien nodded. I have learned much about caring for Max during our travels. I would be honored to ensure his well-being while respecting the administrator's concerns. Collins looked around at all the faces watching him. He could see that everyone was waiting for his decision, and none of them looked happy with his position so far. The cargo bay is not suitable for long-term housing of a pet, Collins said weakly. Max isn't a pet, Amy said firmly. He's a working military animal with full certification for space travel and hazardous environments. He's probably better trained than half the people on this station. One of the watching engineers called out, My daughter has been asking for months when we could get a station pet. This seems like a perfect solution. Another worker added, Yeah, and having a bomb detection dog around might actually make us safer, not less safe. Collins could feel the situation slipping away from him. He had always prided himself on running a tight, efficient station with clear rules. But now those rules were making him look foolish in front of his own staff. The insurance implications alone? Collins began, but Jake interrupted him. Sir, I've already checked with our insurance provider. Military working animals are covered under the same policies as human personnel. Collins was running out of arguments. He looked at Max again, who had now laid down and was peacefully watching the conversation. The dog's calm behavior was not helping Collins make his case about dangerous animals. Dr. Sarah Kim, the station's chief medical officer, stepped forward from the crowd. Administrator, I've been listening to this discussion and I think we're missing an important point. Everyone turned to look at her. We've all heard the stories about what draconians do to their enemies, Dr. Kim continued. But here we have one who has not only requested asylum, but has also learned to care for what his species would consider prey. That's not just unusual, it's revolutionary. She looked directly at Collins. If we turn away this opportunity to show other species that change is possible, what does that say about human values? Collins felt the weight of everyone's eyes on him. He knew that whatever decision he made would be talked about throughout the station for months to come. Kethavar spoke again, his voice gentle despite his intimidating appearance. Administrator Collins, I understand your position. You have rules that protect your station and your people. I respect this, but perhaps rules can serve wisdom rather than replace it. He gestured toward Max. This small being has shown me that strength is not always about conquering. Sometimes it is about protecting. If you allow him to stay, I promise that both he and I will follow whatever guidelines you set. Amy watched Collins carefully. She could see him struggling with his decision. Finally, she played her last card. Sir, I should mention that Earth. Command is very interested in the success of this asylum case. They see it as potentially opening diplomatic channels with moderate draconian factions. I would hate to have to report that the mission failed due to pet policies. Collins understood the implication clearly. His career could suffer if he made the wrong choice here. After a long moment, Collins sighed heavily. Fine. The animal may stay in the cargo bay area under the direct supervision of Kethavar, but any problems and they both leave immediately. The crowd of watchers broke into smiles and quiet cheering. Amy felt relief wash over her. Thank you, sir, Kethavar said with a slight bow. You will not regret this decision. As the crowd dispersed, Jake heard several workers talking excitedly about the unusual new residents. Amy's question about which animal Collins meant had already become a station joke that people would remember for years. Collins returned to his office, muttering about regulations and precedents. But even he had to admit, privately, that watching a former alien warlord gently pet a dog was something he never thought he would see. 3 days had passed since Kethavar and Max settled into their makeshift home in Cargo Bay 7. The arrangement was working better than anyone had expected. Kethavar kept the area spotlessly clean, and Max had quickly learned the layout of the station. The dog had even made friends with several crew members who brought him treats when they thought no one was looking. Jake was reviewing supply requests when the station's alarm system suddenly blared. Red lights flashed throughout the corridors. As the automated voice announced, "Unknown vessels approaching, all personnel to stations." Jake rushed to the command center where Collins was already studying the sensor displays. 3 large ships had appeared at the edge of the system, moving toward the station with clear hostile intent. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," reported Lieutenant Peters from the communications station. "Put it through," Collins ordered, his voice tight with worry. The main screen flickered to life, showing the angular face of a draconian officer. His scales were darker than Kethavar's, and his eyes burned with cold anger. I am Commander Vextar of the Draconian Fourth Fleet, the alien announced. You are harboring a traitor to the Empire. Surrender Kethavar immediately, or your pathetic station will be reduced to scrap metal. Collins looked around the command center nervously. Beta 7 had no military defenses beyond basic shields. Against 3 Draconian warships, they would last perhaps minutes. Commander Vextar, Collins replied, trying to keep his voice steady. This is a neutral trading station. We operate under galactic law and— Galactic law means nothing to traders, Vextar interrupted. You have 1 hour to comply. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in tense silence. Jake activated the station-wide intercom. Amy Carter and Kethvar to the command center immediately. Within minutes, Amy arrived with Max at her side. Kethavar followed close behind, his face grim as he sensed the tension in the room. They've come for me, Kethavar said simply when he saw the ships on the display. Who's Vextar? Amy asked. Kethavar's voice was heavy with old pain. My former second-in-command. We served together for 20 years. He believes that my request for asylum has dishonored our entire clan. Collins paced nervously behind his desk. What does he want exactly? To take me back for trial and execution, Kethvar replied without emotion. And to prove that humans make Draconians weak. Amy stepped forward. Well, he's not getting you. We'll figure something else out. Kethvar looked at her with surprise. Lieutenant Carter, you cannot fight 3 warships with this station. Many innocent people will die. So what do you suggest? Jake asked. Kethvar was quiet for a long moment, then spoke slowly. I will go with them. It is the only way to prevent bloodshed. Absolutely not, Amy said firmly. We didn't come this far just to hand you over to be executed. She's right, Jake added. Besides, giving in to threats like this sets a bad precedent. Other groups will think they can just show up and demand whatever they want. Before anyone could respond, Max suddenly barked and ran toward the door. The dog had excellent hearing and had detected something the humans missed. What is it, boy? Amy asked, but Max was already heading down the corridor. They followed the dog through the station's winding passages until they reached Cargo Bay 7. Max barked again and pawed at the main door controls. He's trying to tell us something, Amy realized. Jake opened the door and they all stepped inside. The bay looked normal except for one thing. Max's sleeping area had been disturbed. His blankets were pushed aside and his water bowl was overturned. Kethvar examined the scene carefully. Someone has been here, he said grimly. Suddenly, armed, figures stepped out from behind cargo containers. 6 Draconian soldiers in full combat gear surrounded them, weapons raised. At their head was a young officer with bright green scales. Uncle Kethvar, the young Draconian said in accented English. Commander Vexatar sends his greetings. Kethvar straightened, his voice taking on the tone of command. Zekrin, you were always good at infiltration. How did you reach the station without being detected? The same way you taught me, Uncle. Small ships, minimal power signatures. Zekrin's weapon remained pointed at Amy. The commander wants to speak with you before the trial. Amy noticed that Zekrin seemed uncomfortable with his orders. His hands shook slightly as he held his weapon. Let the humans go, Kethvar said calmly. Your quarrel is with me. I'm afraid not, Zekrin replied. The commander wants to understand why you chose aliens over your own kind. He thinks these humans have poisoned your mind somehow. Max had been standing quietly beside Amy, but now he started walking slowly toward the Draconian soldiers. Amy tried to call him back, but the dog ignored her. "Max, no," she whispered urgently. The soldiers tensed as the dog approached them. In draconian culture, small animals were seen as either food or pests. Several of the soldiers aimed their weapons at Max, but before anyone could fire, Kethvar moved. In one swift motion, he stepped between Max and the soldiers, scooping the dog up in his massive arms. "Do not harm him," Kethvar said firmly, holding Max protectively against his chest. The draconian soldiers stared in shock. They had never seen their former commander show protective instincts toward what they considered a meaningless creature. Zekrin lowered his weapon slightly, his expression confused. "Uncle, why do you protect this animal?" Kethvar looked down at Max, who was calmly resting in his arms despite the tense situation. "Because he trusts me to protect him, and I will not betray that trust." "But it's just a beast," one of the other soldiers protested. "It has no value." "No," Kethvar replied, quietly. "I have learned that every living being has value. Max has taught me this." Amy watched the exchange with growing hope. She could see doubt creeping into the faces of some soldiers. Zekrin shook his head as if trying to clear it. "The commander said you would speak strangely. He said the humans have made you forget our ways." "Our ways," Kethvar repeated thoughtfully. "Which ways, Zekrin? The ways that made us feared throughout the galaxy? Or the ways that left us alone, trusted by no one, loved by no one?" He gently set Max down, and the dog immediately moved to stand beside Amy again. "I have not forgotten our strength," Kethvar continued, "but I have learned that true strength sometimes means choosing mercy over violence, protection over destruction." The young officer looked uncertain. "The commander will want to hear this for himself." Jake had been watching the exchange carefully. "What if we arrange a meeting? Commander Vextar can come aboard the station under a flag of truce." "Draconians do not recognize human concepts of truce," Zekrin replied automatically. "But I do," Kethvar said firmly. "And if Vextar truly wants to understand what has happened to me, he should see for himself rather than simply destroy everything." Zekrin hesitated, clearly torn between his orders and his growing curiosity about his uncle's transformation. Amy stepped forward carefully. "What harm could it do? If your commander is right about humans corrupting Kethvar, then seeing us should prove his point." The young Draconian considered this logic. After a long moment, he activated his communication device and began speaking. In rapid Draconian, the conversation was brief and apparently heated. Finally, Zekrin turned back to them. "Commander Vextar agrees to come aboard, but he warns that any treachery will result in the immediate destruction of this station." Kethvar nodded gravely. "Then we must ensure there is no treachery from either side." Commander Vexatar strode through the docking bay with the confident walk of someone who had never lost a battle. His black armor gleamed under the station lights, and his scarred face showed years of combat experience. Behind him walked 4 elite guards, their weapons ready but not drawn. Jake had cleared the largest cargo bay for the meeting. Station security stood at a respectful distance, while Amy, Kethvar, and Max waited in the center of the space. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Vextar stopped 10 feet away from Kethvar and studied his former leader with cold eyes. The two Draconians were roughly the same size, but Vextar's posture radiated aggression, while Kethvar remained calm. "So," Vextar said in heavily accented English, "this is what the mighty Kethvar has become, standing with humans and their pets." Max, sensing the hostility, moved closer to Amy's legs but did not growl or show fear. I stand with those who have shown me honor, Kethvar replied evenly. Something I had forgotten existed. Vextar's laugh was harsh. Honor? From these weak creatures? They hide behind technology because they lack the strength to fight properly. Amy started to respond, but Kethvar raised a hand slightly, asking her to remain silent. You speak of strength, old friend, Kethvar said. But what strength does it take to destroy those who cannot fight back? What honor is there in showing no mercy? Mercy is weakness, Vexatar snapped. You know this. We conquered half the galaxy because we were strong enough to do what was necessary. And what did it gain us? Kethvar asked. Fear, yes. Respect? No. Every species in the galaxy sees us as monsters to be avoided or destroyed. Vexatar gestured angrily at the humans around them. And these creatures offer something better? They are soft, Kethvar. They will make you soft, too. As if summoned by their conversation, Max suddenly trotted away from Amy and walked directly toward Vextar. The Draconian commander tensed, his hand moving toward his weapon. Max, come back, Amy called, but the dog ignored her. Max approached Vextar without fear, his tail wagging slightly. The dog sat down in front of the alien commander and tilted his head, studying this new person with curious eyes. What is this creature doing? Vexatar demanded, looking confused. He's trying to make friends, Amy explained quietly. It's what he does. Vexatar stared down at Max, clearly not understanding the concept. In Draconian society, smaller creatures either ran in fear or attacked desperately. They did not simply approach and wait peacefully. Send it away, Vexatar ordered. But before anyone could call Max back, the dog did something unexpected. He lay down and rolled onto his back, exposing his belly in a clear gesture of trust and submission. The Draconian guards raised their weapons, thinking the animal was attacking, but Vextar held up a hand to stop them. He continued staring at Max with growing confusion. Why does it do this? He asked. He's showing that he trusts you not to hurt him, Kethvar explained gently. It is a sign of respect in his language. Vextar looked from Max to Kethvar and back again. But I could kill it easily. Yes, Kethvar agreed. That's what makes his trust meaningful. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Vextar slowly knelt down and extended one clawed hand toward Max. The dog's tail wagged faster, and he gently sniffed the alien's fingers. Vextar jerked his hand back as if burned. This is unnatural. Amy watched the exchange with growing hope. She had seen Max work his magic on hostile humans before, but never on an alien warrior. Commander, Kethvar said softly, may I show you something? Vextar stood up and nodded curtly. Kethvar knelt down and called Max over. The dog trotted to him immediately and sat down. Then Kethvar began demonstrating simple commands in English. Sit, he said, and Max sat. Stay, and Max remained perfectly still. Come, and Max approached. The humans taught you to control this creature? Vexatar asked. No, Kethvar replied. They taught me to communicate with him. There is a difference. He looked up at his former commander. Watch this. Kethvar stood up and walked to the far side of the cargo bay. Max started to follow, but Kethvar held up his hand and said, Stay. Max immediately stopped and sat down, even though every instinct told him to follow his friend. Now, Kethvar called across the room. Max, go to Amy. Max immediately ran to Amy and sat beside her, tail wagging with pride at completing the task correctly. He obeys because he chooses to, Kethavar explained as he walked back. Not because he fears punishment, but because he trusts that my commands are meant to keep him safe. Vextar watched this demonstration with growing unease. But how can you trust something so weak? Weakness? Amy finally spoke up. Max has saved more lives than most soldiers. He's brave enough to enter burning buildings, smart enough to detect explosives that could kill hundreds of people, and loyal enough to put himself in danger for strangers. She looked directly at Vextar. That doesn't sound weak to me. Zekrin, who had been watching quietly, stepped forward. Uncle Kethavar, the stories say you once killed a creature like this with your bare hands during the siege of Proxima Station. Kethavar nodded sadly. I did. And I felt nothing. No remorse. No second thoughts. It was just another obstacle to remove. He looked down at Max, who had wandered back over to investigate Vextar's boots again. But now I understand what I destroyed that day. Not just a life, but trust, loyalty, and love. Things I had never experienced and therefore could not value. Vexatar's voice was quieter now, uncertain. You speak as if these feelings have value in battle. They do, Kethavar replied firmly. A soldier who fights for love of his comrades will die before he retreats. A warrior who protects the innocent fights with strength beyond his own body. These humans understand this. Amy decided to take a risk. Commander Vexatar, would you like to see what real strength looks like? The alien commander nodded, curiosity overcoming his hostility. Amy walked over to one of the cargo containers and activated an emergency beacon. The device began flashing and emitting a high-pitched whine that hurt everyone's ears. Max, search, Amy commanded. Immediately, Max began systematically investigating the cargo bay. He moved methodically from container to container, his nose working constantly. When he reached the container with the beacon, he sat down and barked once. Good boy, Amy said, turning off the beacon. That was a simulated bomb detection. Max just potentially saved everyone in this room. She looked at Vextar. He did that not because we threatened him or forced him, but because he wants to help. Because he's part of our pack. Vextar stared at Max with new understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. Pack, he repeated slowly. Yes, Kethavar said. The humans have a concept unknown to our people. They fight not just for territory or resources, but for each other. They form bonds that make them stronger together than apart. Suddenly, Vextar's expression hardened again. Pretty words, old friend. But words will not decide this matter. He stepped back and drew his ceremonial sword. I challenge you to combat, Kethavar. When I defeat you, I will prove to these humans that their soft ways lead only to weakness and death. Kethavar looked sadly at his former friend, then nodded. I accept your challenge, Vextar, but I ask one thing. What? Let us fight by human rules of combat. No weapons, no killing. The first to yield loses. Vexatar's eyes narrowed. You seek to handicap me with alien customs. I seek to show you the difference between strength and brutality, Kethavar replied. After a moment's consideration, Vextar threw down his sword. Very well, but when I win, you will return with me for proper judgment. As the two massive aliens faced each other in the center of the cargo bay, Max seemed to sense that something important was about to happen. The dog moved to Amy's side and whined softly, his instincts telling him that his friend was in danger. The two draconians circled each other slowly in the cleared cargo bay. Vextar moved with the fluid grace of a predator, while Kethvar remained calm and defensive. The watching humans and draconian soldiers formed a wide circle around the combatants. Jake had seen many fights in his years running trading stations, but nothing like this. When draconians fought, it was usually to the death. The idea of a non-lethal combat was completely foreign to their culture. Vextar struck first, lunging forward with claws extended. But instead of trying to kill, he aimed for Kethvar's shoulder. It was clear he was struggling to adapt to the human rules of engagement. Kethvar deflected the attack and countered with a controlled strike to Vextar's side. The blow was powerful enough to stagger his opponent, but not to cause serious injury. "You hold back," Vextar accused, breathing heavily. "Fight me properly." "I am fighting properly," Kethvar replied. "By human standards." They clashed again, and this time Vextar managed to land a solid hit that sent Kethvar stumbling backward. The watching draconian soldiers cheered their commander, while the human crew members looked worried. Amy watched tensely as the fight continued. Both aliens were incredibly strong, but Vextar seemed to have the advantage. He was younger and more aggressive, while Kethvar appeared to be holding himself back from using his full strength. Max whined softly beside Amy, clearly distressed by the conflict. The dog could sense the tension and violence even if he didn't understand the context. The fight continued for several minutes, with both combatants landing solid blows. Kethvar's defensive style was keeping him in the match, but Vextar's relentless attacks were slowly wearing him down. Then something unexpected happened. As Vextar prepared for another charge, Max suddenly broke away from Amy and ran directly into the center of the fighting area. "Max, no!" Amy shouted, but it was too late. The dog positioned himself between the two massive aliens, looking up at them with confused and frightened eyes. He didn't understand why his friends were hurting each other. Vextar had been in mid-charge when Max appeared. Unable to stop his momentum, he aimed a powerful blow at the small obstacle in his path. From his perspective, the dog was just another target to remove, but Kethvar reacted instantly. Without thinking about strategy or defense, he threw himself forward to protect Max. Vextar's claws, meant for the dog, instead raked across Kethvar's chest, sending him crashing to the ground. The cargo bay fell silent except for Kethvar's labored breathing. Dark green blood seeped from 3 parallel wounds across his chest. Max immediately ran to Kethvar's side, whimpering and trying to lick the injured alien's face. Kethvar managed to lift one hand and gently pet the dog, showing that he was still conscious. Vextar stood over his fallen opponent, victory within his grasp. According to their original agreement, Kethvar had lost the combat. But the draconian commander made no move to claim his win. Instead, he stared down at the scene before him, a mighty warrior bleeding on the ground because he had chosen to protect a creature that most draconians would consider worthless. "Why?" Vextar asked quietly. "Why did you sacrifice your victory for this animal?" Kethvar struggled to sit up, still keeping one protective arm around Max. "Because he was in danger. Because he trusts me to keep him safe. But the combat was more important. Your honor was at stake." "No," Kethvar said firmly, despite his pain. "My honor was exactly what was at stake, and I could not keep my honor while allowing harm to come to an innocent being under my protection." Amy rushed forward with a medical kit, but Kethvar waved her away gently. "I am not badly hurt." Draconian hide is tough. Vextar looked around, at the watching faces. The human crew members were looking at Kethvar with obvious respect and admiration. Even more surprising, several of his own soldiers were looking troubled by what they had witnessed. Young Zekrin stepped forward from the group of Draconian soldiers. "Commander, may I speak?" Vextar nodded curtly. "I have served with you for 3 years," Zekrin said carefully. "You have taught me that strength comes from conquering enemies and showing no mercy." He gestured toward Kethvar, who was now sitting up with Max pressed against his side. "But I do not understand how protecting something weak can make someone stronger." Uncle Kethvar lost the fight, but everyone here respects him more, not less. Vextar's expression was troubled. Respect from enemies means nothing. "Does it?" Amy asked, stepping forward. "Because right now, every human on this station would follow Kethvar into battle. Not because we fear him, but because we trust him to protect us the same way he protected Max." She looked directly at Vextar. "How many beings would willingly follow you?" The question hit its mark. Vexitar's soldiers obeyed him because they feared punishment for disobedience. The species his fleet had conquered submitted because they had no choice. But voluntary loyalty, the kind Amy described, was something he had never experienced. Dr. Kim approached with additional medical supplies. "Let me look at those wounds," she told Kethvar. As the doctor began treating his injuries, Kethvar spoke to Vextar. "Do you remember the siege of Tau Ceti 7? Vexitar nodded. It had been one of their most difficult victories. "We lost 30% of our forces taking that world," Kethvar continued. "And within a year, the population rebelled and drove out our occupation forces." "They were ungrateful for the order we brought them," Vextar said automatically. "No," Kethvar replied. "They fought us because we gave them no choice. We ruled through fear, and fear breeds resistance." He winced as Dr. Kim cleaned one of his wounds, but continued speaking. "But watch this," he said, then called softly to Max. "Come here, friend." Max immediately moved closer, settling down next to Kethvar, despite the smell of blood and disinfectant. The dog's loyalty was unwavering. "He follows me not because he must, but because he chooses to," Kethvar explained. "Because I have earned his trust by protecting him, not by threatening him." Zekrin spoke up again. "Uncle, are you saying that these humans fight differently than we do?" "Yes," Kethvar replied. "They fight for each other, not just for themselves. It makes them formidable in ways I never understood before." Amy decided to share something personal. "My unit once held a position for 6 days against overwhelming odds. We could have retreated and saved ourselves, but we stayed because civilians were trapped behind us." She looked at the assembled Draconians. "We didn't stay because our commanders threatened us. We stayed because abandoning those people would have meant abandoning everything we believed in." Vextar was quiet for a long time, processing everything he had seen and heard. Finally, he spoke. "I came here believing you had become weak, old, friend. But I see now that I do not understand what strength really means." He looked down at Max, who was still pressed protectively against Kethvar's side. "This small creature shows no fear of me, even though I could destroy it easily. Yet, my own soldiers stepped carefully around me, always worried about saying the wrong thing." One of his guards, an older soldier named Grixaval, surprised everyone by speaking up. "Commander, perhaps there is wisdom in learning new ways of thinking about strength." Vextar turned to stare at his subordinate, shocked that anyone would question their traditional methods. But instead of anger, he felt something he had never experienced before, curiosity about what else he might not understand. "Tell me more about this pack mentality," he said to Amy. "How does caring for the weak make the strong more powerful?" Amy smiled, realizing that they had reached a turning point in the confrontation. The real battle was not between Kethvar and Vextar, but between old ways of thinking and new possibilities for understanding. 2 hours after the fight, Kethvar sat in the station's small medical bay while Dr. Kim finished bandaging his wounds. Max lay on the floor beside the examination table, refusing to leave his friend's side, despite Amy's attempts to coax him away. "The cuts aren't deep," Dr. Kim explained to Amy. "Draconian physiology is remarkably resilient. He should be fine in a few days." Vextar had remained on the station after the combat, much to everyone's surprise. He and several of his soldiers were currently in the main conference room with Jake and Collins, discussing what Amy hoped would be a peaceful resolution to the situation. "How are you feeling?" Amy asked Kethvar as Dr. Kim packed up her medical supplies. "Confused," Kethvar admitted. "In my culture, losing a challenge means losing all honor, but the humans here treat me with more respect than before, not less. Dr." Kim paused in her packing. "That's because you showed moral courage. Fighting to win is easy when you're strong. Fighting to protect someone weaker takes real bravery." Before Kethvar could respond, the station's emergency alarm began blaring again. Red lights flashed, and the automated voice announced, "Critical. System failure in reactor section. All non-essential personnel evacuate immediately." Dr. Kim grabbed her emergency kit and rushed toward the door. "I need to get to the command center. Can you two make it to the safe zone on your own?" "Go," Amy told her. "We'll be fine." But as Dr. Kim left, Amy's communication device crackled to life. Jake's voice came through, tight with worry. "Amy, we need Kethvar in engineering immediately. The reactor's cooling system is failing, and the heat levels are too high for humans to enter the repair area." Amy looked at Kethvar's bandaged chest. "You're injured. You shouldn't be doing heavy repair work." Kethvar was already standing up, testing his range of motion. "Draconian evolution occurred on a high-temperature world. Heat that would kill. Humans is merely uncomfortable for me. But your wounds will heal," Kethvar finished firmly. "If the reactor fails, everyone on this station dies, including Max." Amy realized he was right. She activated her communicator. "Jake, we're on our way." They made their way quickly through the station's corridors, passing other crew members who were evacuating to safe areas. Max trotted alongside them, seeming to understand that something serious was happening. In the engineering section, they found Jake and Chief Engineer Rick Chen working frantically at control panels. The air was already getting noticeably warmer. "What's the situation?" Amy asked. "Cooling pump failure in the primary reactor," Rick explained without looking up from his diagnostics. "The backup system can't handle the load. We need someone to go into the reactor chamber and manually reset the primary pumps." He gestured toward a heavily shielded doorway. "The temperature in there is already over 200 degrees Fahrenheit and climbing. Any human going in there would be dead in minutes." Kethvar studied the reactor schematics on Rick's screen. "Show me what needs to be done." For the next 10 minutes, Rick walked Kethvar through the repair procedure. It was complex work that required both technical knowledge and steady hands. The chamber would be filled with superheated air and dangerous radiation. "I must warn you," Rick said seriously, "even for a Draconian, this is extremely dangerous. If something goes wrong while you're in there, we won't be able to reach you in time to help. Kethvar nodded. I understand the risks. As they prepared, the necessary tools. Vextar appeared in the engineering section with Zekran close behind. The Draconian commander's expression was unreadable. I heard about the emergency, Vextar said. My ship's sensors detected the power fluctuations. Jake looked nervous. Commander, this is an internal station matter. We'll handle it. With Kethvar risking his life to save you, Vextar observed. He volunteered, Amy said defensively. Vextar studied his former subordinate, who was now putting on a protective suit designed for radiation exposure. Why? Kethvar looked up from his preparations. Because these people have shown me kindness. Because this station has become my home. Because it is the right thing to do. Even though they initially tried to keep your animal companion away? Especially because of that, Kethvar replied. They overcame their fear and prejudice. They gave us a chance when they had no reason to trust us. Max whined softly, sensing the tension and danger in the air. Kethvar knelt down and gently petted the dog. Stay with Amy, he told Max in a quiet voice. I will return soon. But as Kethvar approached the reactor chamber entrance, Max suddenly broke away from Amy and ran to his side. The dog sat down firmly and refused to move despite Amy's calls. He wants to come with you, Amy realized. The radiation will harm him, Kethvar said with concern. Rick spoke up. Actually, the suit sensors show that the radiation levels aren't immediately lethal, just dangerous over extended exposure, and dogs have been used in hazardous environments before. Kethvar looked down at Max, who stared back with complete trust and determination. Very well, friend, Kethvar said softly. But we must be quick. Vextar watched this exchange with growing amazement. The idea of risking additional lives to provide emotional support during a dangerous mission was completely alien to Draconian thinking. You would endanger the animal for comfort? He asked. No, Kethvar replied as he sealed his protective suit. Max chooses to come because he understands pack loyalty better than either of us. With that, Kethvar and Max entered the reactor chamber through the heavily shielded airlock. The temperature readings on Rick's monitors immediately jumped as the door opened and closed. For the next 30 minutes, everyone in engineering watched the progress monitors with nervous attention. They could track Kethvar's movement through the chamber, but communication was impossible due to the radiation interference. Amy paced anxiously while Jake monitored the station's power levels. Vextar stood silently, but his attention never wavered from the displays. Temperatures at 250 degrees now, Rick reported. Even for a Draconian, that's approaching dangerous levels. Suddenly, the power fluctuations stopped. The reactor readings stabilized as the primary cooling system came back online. He did it, Rick said with relief. The reactor is stable. But their celebration was cut short when Rick noticed something on his monitors. Wait, there's a problem. The chamber door mechanism was damaged by the heat. It's not responding to commands. Amy felt her heart sink. Are you saying they're trapped in there? The manual override is inside the chamber, Rick explained. But the heat levels are still too high for the door mechanism to function properly. They'll need to wait for the chamber to cool down. How long? Jake asked. At least an hour. Maybe 2. Vexatar stepped forward, his expression grim. They will not survive that long, even with protection. Amy stared at the monitors showing the chamber temperature. Even though it was dropping slowly, it was still far too hot for extended exposure. Then Vextar did something that surprised everyone. He began removing his armor and reaching for one of the spare protective suits. "What are you doing?" Jake asked. "Kethvar is my responsibility," Vextar replied. "If he dies because of his compassion for these humans, then I have learned nothing from this experience." Zekrin stepped forward as well. "Commander, I request permission to assist." "Denied. This is not your burden." "With respect, sir, Uncle Kethvar taught me everything I know about engineering. If anyone can help him repair the door mechanism, it would be me." Vextar studied his young officer for a moment, then nodded curtly. "Very well. But we follow my orders exactly." As the two Draconians prepared to enter the dangerous chamber, Amy realized she was witnessing something unprecedented. Draconian warriors risking their lives to save a comrade who had chosen mercy over conquest. The pack mentality that Kethvar had learned from humans was spreading to his own kind. Vextar and Zekrin worked frantically inside the reactor chamber while the station crew monitored their progress from outside. The temperature was slowly dropping, but it was still dangerously high for extended exposure, even for Draconians. Through the thick observation window, Amy could see Kethvar slumped against a wall, clearly exhausted from the heat and his earlier injuries. Max lay pressed against his side, panting heavily, but refusing to leave his friend. "Door mechanism is completely fried," Rick reported, reading the diagnostic data. "They're having to rebuild the entire control circuit from spare parts." Jake watched the temperature readings with growing worry. "How much longer can they survive in there?" "Not much longer," Dr. Kim replied grimly. She had joined them in engineering when she heard about the rescue attempt. "Even draconian physiology has limits." 20 minutes later, the airlock finally cycled open. Vexitar emerged first, carrying an unconscious Zekrin. Behind him came Kethvar, moving slowly but under his own power, with Max walking weakly beside. Dr. Kim immediately began treating the heat exhaustion while Amy checked on Max. The dog was tired and dehydrated, but otherwise unharmed. "Status report," Vextar demanded once Dr. Kim had finished her initial examination of his soldiers. "They'll all be fine," Dr. Kim assured him. "Some heat exhaustion and dehydration, but nothing permanent. Kethvar's wounds reopened slightly, but they're still not serious." As the medical team worked, Collins appeared in engineering looking flustered and worried. "Morrison, we have a bigger problem," he announced. "Long-range sensors are detecting a large fleet approaching the system. They'll be here in about 6 hours. Jake felt his stomach drop. "Whose fleet?" Collins looked directly at Vextar. "Draconian Imperial Navy, 3 battle cruisers and a command ship." Vextar's expression darkened. "Admiral Krexthu. He commands the 5th Imperial Fleet." "Friend of yours?" Amy asked sarcastically. "Hardly," Vextar replied. "Krexthu believes that any Draconian who shows mercy or negotiates with aliens is a traitor to the Empire. He has likely come to collect both Kethvar and myself." Kethvar, who had been listening while Dr. Kim worked on his bandages, spoke up weakly. "This is my fault. I should never have involved civilians in this conflict." "Actually," Colin said, surprising everyone, "I may have made things worse. When Vextar's ships first arrived, I sent a distress signal to the nearest human naval base. They're sending a battle group, but they won't arrive for at least 10 hours. Amy calculated quickly. "So we'll have about 4 hours with just the Imperial fleet here before human reinforcements arrive." 4 hours is more than enough time for Krexthu to destroy this station and everyone on it, Vexatar said grimly. Jake paced nervously around. "The engineering section." What are our options? Limited, Vextar admitted. Krexthu will demand that I turn over Kethvar for immediate execution. When I refuse, he will attack. When you refuse? Amy asked, surprised. Vextar looked at her with something that might have been respect. I came here believing that Kethvar had become weak. Instead, I've learned that I never understood what true strength meant. He gestured toward the reactor chamber they had just escaped. A weak leader would have let his subordinates risk their lives while staying safe. Kethvar entered that chamber because protecting others was more important to him than protecting himself. Zekrin, who had regained consciousness, nodded weakly. Commander, the other soldiers have been talking. They are confused by what they have seen here. Confused how? Vextar asked. They expected to find Uncle Kethvar broken and defeated. Instead, they see him respected by his former enemies and willing to die for beings he barely knows. Zekrin struggled to sit up. Some are beginning to ask whether our traditional ways are truly the strongest. Amy had an idea. What if we could prove that Kethvar's way is actually stronger than the traditional draconian approach? How? Jake asked. A trial, Amy said. Not a trial by combat, but a trial by human standards. Let Kethvar present his case to Admiral Krexthu and any other draconians who want to listen. Vextar looked skeptical. Krexthu will never agree to alien legal procedures. But he might agree to a formal hearing, Kethvar said thoughtfully. Draconian law does allow for a warrior to present a defense before execution, especially if he claims his actions serve the greater glory of the Empire. And what defense would you present? Vexitar asked. Kethvar looked around at the assembled humans, then down at Max, who was sleeping peacefully despite all the chaos around him. That I have discovered a form of strength our people never knew existed. That building alliances through trust and respect creates more lasting power than conquest through fear. Collins, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. The station has formal hearing chambers. We use them for trade disputes and diplomatic meetings. If Admiral Krexthu agrees to the procedure, we could host it here. What would happen if Kethvar loses this trial? Amy asked. Immediate execution, Vextar replied bluntly, and probably the destruction of this station as an example to other aliens who might harbor draconian defectors. Amy looked at Kethvar. Are you willing to take that risk? Kethvar was quiet for a long moment, gently petting Max as he considered the question. I have lived most of my life bringing fear and death to other beings, he finally said. If I die trying to show my people a better way, then perhaps my death will have more meaning than my life has had so far. Dr. Kim finished treating Kethvar's reopened wounds and stepped back. Well, you have about 5 hours to prepare your case. I suggest you use them wisely. As the group began to disperse to make preparations, Vextar approached Amy privately. Lieutenant Carter, may I ask you something? Of course. This trial, do you truly believe it can change minds that have been set in their ways for generations? Amy considered the question carefully. Commander, 3 days ago you came here convinced that Kethvar had become weak and that humans were corrupting influences. What do you believe now? Vextar was silent for a moment. I believe that I have much to learn. Then yes, Amy said. With conviction, I believe minds can change. The question is whether Admiral Krexthu's mind is as open as yours turned out to be. As they prepared for what might be the most important trial in recent galactic history, Amy couldn't help but notice that Max had positioned himself protectively next to Kethvar. The dog seemed to understand that his friend was facing a great danger, and he was determined to offer whatever support he could. It occurred to Amy that Max might be the perfect example of the pack loyalty and unconditional trust that Kethvar would need to demonstrate to the Admiral. Sometimes the most powerful arguments came not from words, but from simple acts of devotion. The trial would determine not just Kethavar's fate, but potentially the future relationship between humans and Draconians throughout the galaxy. And a small dog with unwavering loyalty might be the key to changing the course of interstellar history. Admiral Krexthu was exactly what Amy had expected from a traditional Draconian military leader. He stood nearly 9 feet tall, his black scales scarred from countless battles, and his cold yellow eyes showed no trace of mercy or compassion. When he entered the station's main conference room, even Vextar seemed nervous. Behind the Admiral came 6 of his most trusted officers, all wearing full ceremonial armor. They took positions around the room like guards, making it clear that they expected trouble. Jake had arranged the conference room to accommodate both human and Draconian customs. Kethvar sat at a central table with Amy beside him as his advocate. Max lay quietly at Kethvar's feet, sensing the tension but remaining calm. Admiral Krexthu took his seat across from them and studied Kethvar with obvious disgust. "So," the Admiral began in heavily accented English, "this is the mighty Kethvar, conqueror of 17 worlds, terror of the Outer Rim." His voice dripped with contempt. "Look at you now, sitting with aliens and their pets, begging for mercy." Kethvar met the Admiral's gaze steadily. "I am not begging for mercy, Admiral. I am requesting a formal hearing to present evidence that my actions serve the greater glory of the Empire." "Glory?" Krexthu laughed harshly. "What glory is there in weakness? In submission to inferior species?" Amy started to respond, but Kethvar raised a hand slightly, asking her to let him speak. "Admiral, may I tell you about the siege of Proxima Station?" Kethvar asked. Krexthu nodded curtly. It had been one of Kethvar's most famous victories. "I conquered that station in 18 hours with minimal casualties to our forces," Kethvar continued. "The defenders surrendered rather than face total annihilation." "As they should have," the Admiral replied. "But what happened next?" Kethvar asked. "Within 6 months, the station was attacked by rebel forces. Within a year, it was completely lost to the Empire. All because the beings we conquered hated us enough to risk everything for revenge." Admiral Krexthu shifted uncomfortably. The loss of Proxima Station had been a significant embarrassment for the Empire. "Now let me tell you about this station," Kethvar continued. "When I arrived here as a refugee, the administrator tried to turn me away. But these humans made a choice. Instead of destroying me or imprisoning me, they gave me a chance to prove my worth." He gestured around the room. "Look at the result. Not only do I serve willingly, but Commander Vextar and his soldiers have also begun to question whether conquest is truly the strongest path to power." Admiral Krexthu's eyes narrowed as he looked at Vextar. "Is this true, Commander? Have you been infected with this weakness as well?" Vextar stood at attention. "Admiral, I came here to retrieve a traitor. Instead, I found a warrior who had discovered a new form of strength." "Explain." Vextar gestured toward Max, who was still lying peacefully beside Kethvar. "This small creature has no weapons, no armor, no ability to defend itself against us. Yet it shows no fear. Why? Because it is too stupid to understand danger. The Admiral replied dismissively. No, Vextar said firmly, because it trusts Kethvar to protect it, and that trust is returned with absolute loyalty. Amy decided it was time to demonstrate what they meant. Max, come here, she called softly. Max immediately stood and walked over to Amy, but his eyes remained on Kethvar, clearly reluctant to leave his friend's side. Now watch this, Amy said to the Admiral. She took out a small training device that made a high-pitched sound when activated. Max, emergency protocol. Immediately, Max ran back to Kethvar and positioned himself protectively in front of the seated Draconian, facing toward the perceived threat. He's protecting someone who could kill him with one hand, Amy explained. Not because he's forced to, but because he chooses to. That's the power of loyalty freely given. Admiral Krexthu stared at the scene with confusion. But what use is the loyalty of something so weak? Kethvar spoke up. Admiral, 3 days ago this station's reactor nearly melted down. I volunteered to enter the reactor chamber to make repairs, even though the heat could have killed me. That was your duty, as the strongest available warrior, the Admiral replied. But why did I risk my life for aliens who owed me nothing? Kethvar asked. Because they had earned my loyalty through their kindness, just as I have earned Max's. Loyalty through protection and care. Young Zekrin stepped forward from where he had been standing with the other Draconian soldiers. Admiral, may I speak? Krexthu nodded grudgingly. I have served in your fleets for 5 years, Zekrin said. In that time, I have seen many victories won through fear and superior firepower. But I have also seen how quickly those victories crumble when our forces withdraw. He looked directly at the Admiral. But here, I have seen something different. These humans fight for each other, not just for themselves. When they make allies, those allies stay loyal even when times become difficult. One of Admiral Krexthu's officers spoke up angrily. You speak like a traitor, young one. Our ways have built an empire that spans hundreds of systems. An empire, held together by fear, Vextar interjected. An empire where every species dreams of our destruction. Amy saw an opportunity to make a crucial point. Admiral, may I ask you something? How many species voluntarily joined the Draconian Empire? The Admiral's silence was answer enough. Now, Amy continued, how many species have voluntarily allied with humanity? Again, the Admiral said nothing, but his expression showed that he understood the implication. Kethvar stood slowly, with Max immediately moving to his side. Admiral, I am not asking you to abandon our strength or our pride. I am asking you to consider that true strength might include the ability to inspire loyalty rather than just demand obedience. He reached down and gently petted Max, who leaned against his leg trustingly. This small being has taught me that the strongest bonds are those freely chosen. The humans have shown me that protecting the weak can make the strong more powerful, not less. Admiral Krexthu was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with concepts that challenged everything he had believed about power and leadership. Finally, he spoke. What you propose sounds like weakness disguised as philosophy. Then test it, Amy suggested boldly. Give Kethvar a chance to prove that his approach can achieve better results than traditional conquest. How? Kethvar stepped forward. Allow me to establish a rehabilitation center here on this station. Let other Draconian warriors who are tired of endless warfare come here to learn new ways of thinking about strength and honor. Admiral Krexthu's officers looked shocked by the suggestion, but the Admiral himself seemed thoughtful. And if this experiment fails, then you can execute me and destroy the station as planned, Kethavar replied calmly. Amy held her breath as the Admiral considered the proposal. The fate of everyone on the station hung in the balance. After what felt like an eternity, Admiral Krexthu nodded slowly. Very well. You have 6 months to prove that this pack mentality can produce results that serve the Empire. He stood to leave, then paused. But understand this, Kethvar. If you fail, if this experiment proves that mercy makes us weak, then your death will serve as an example to any other Draconian who might consider similar foolishness. As the Admiral and his officers left the station, Amy felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. They had won a reprieve, but now they had to prove that their beliefs about cooperation and trust could actually work. 6 months later, Amy stood in the observation deck of what was now officially called the Interspecies Cooperation Center. Below in the main courtyard, she could see Kethvar teaching a group of young Draconian warriors how to care for a litter of puppies that Max's mate had recently delivered. The sight of massive reptilian predators gently handling tiny, helpless creatures had become a symbol of hope throughout the galaxy. Word of the center's success had spread, and delegations from dozens of species had come to observe and learn. Vextar approached and stood beside Amy at the observation window. The Admiral's inspection is tomorrow, he reminded her. Are you worried? Amy asked. Vextar watched as one of the young Draconians carefully fed a puppy with a bottle. 3 months ago, that warrior would have killed the puppy without a second thought. Now he stays up all night when one of them is sick. He turned to Amy with something that might have been a smile. I think we have succeeded beyond our wildest expectations. Down in the courtyard, Max barked happily as he played with his offspring and their unlikely caretakers. Kethavar looked up at the observation deck and raised one clawed hand in greeting. Amy waved back, thinking about how far they had all come from that first day when Collins had asked her which animal she wanted to leave outside. The question had seemed simple then, but the answer had changed everything. Sometimes the most dangerous creatures could become the best protectors, and sometimes the smallest acts of trust could change the course of galactic history. As Amy watched Kethvar teaching former warriors to be gentle caregivers, she realized that the real victory was not just saving his life, but proving that any being could choose compassion over conquest. The